Before the Iranian Revolution, my Persian grandmother used to entertain government officials and heads of state. She would throw lavish Iranian dinner parties in her home. Nobody understood social graces and manners better than my grandmother did. And I was privileged enough as a young girl to learn those social graces and manners from her. I remember as a young girl learning how to properly serve tea. I remember pouring Persian tea, it smells like cardamom, into small crystal glasses and stirring the sugar cubes to dissolve them without touching the edges of the glasses so it wouldn't make sounds. I remember learning how to carve radishes, and we would put them in cold water and they would blossom by the next day so my grandmother could put them on her platters of Persian food, dripping in saffron, and throw dinner parties. So no doubt that by the time I was in my 30s, I had a love of entertaining, like my grandmother and my mother, and I was throwing a Thanksgiving dinner for friends and family at my home. I remember placing 7 pies perfectly on the table to serve them to my guests. I had baked some of them myself and I was so excited for people to try them. When I went into the kitchen, I discovered that somebody had put their finger in the center of the pies. That someone was my grandmother. With all her social graces, she had started putting her finger in the pies because she had dementia, and everything we knew about her was deteriorating. This was the first time that anyone in my family had to care for someone with cognitive decline. We learned that there was no way to cure this, there was no way to slow it down, and this person who was so independent eventually needed day-to-day care. In 2017, I became a judge, and I took my oath of office, and ever since I became a judge, I've always had a criminal docket. That means I hear cases when people are accused of crimes in our community. Now, amongst the people who are accused, every now and then someone would come to court who couldn't understand what was happening in the court system. That's when the lawyers and the judge have an ethical duty to stop the proceedings and raise the issue of competency. Competency in this legal context means the individual doesn't understand enough of what's going on in that courtroom to be able to defend themselves in court or even to direct their court-appointed lawyer to help them. When that happens, we have a duty and obligation to help the individual get back to a place where they can understand court again. We do that through mental health treatment, medication, and teaching people about the court system. Where that usually happens is in a hospital setting. In Colorado, we have one hospital to serve all of these individuals, and it's located in Pueblo. That's our state hospital. The people who are waiting to go to that hospital come from all over Colorado. A lot of them are incarcerated, waiting over 1 year inside of their jails. So when I first became a judge for the first few years, when someone had this issue, I would bring them into the courtroom and I'd set their case out for 90 days. And I would hope that between that 90-day period, the person would be moved to the hospital and that eventually they wouldn't be in my courtroom when I called their case. But what I discovered is I would call their case every 90 days and they weren't being moved. And the people that were in the courtroom, they had things in common with my grandmother. They were very vulnerable. Some people had dementia, some people had Alzheimer's, some people suffered with intellectual developmental delays, some had traumatic brain injuries, and the list went on. Now, when you're in a courtroom, even the architecture of a courtroom is set up in a way where all the people are sitting there and their eyes are focused on one spot, and that's you as a judge. You're wearing a robe and all eyes are focused on you because there's an expectation that you should be able to resolve whatever dispute is happening or solve the problems in the community. But this was a problem I couldn't quite figure out how to solve. So a couple of years later, I found myself so desperate to do something. It was just so hard to watch this endless sea of faces. And so I started in desperation to threaten to hold the leaders of the hospital in contempt of court. And that means I was threatening to hold those individuals in a position where they may now go to jail if they don't move the vulnerable people out of our jail faster. I called a friend of mine. He was a judge in Leadville area in Summit County, Colorado. He was seeing the exact same things I was seeing, and we were expressing the same frustrations. This was happening all over our state. By the evening before Thanksgiving of 2019, I was preparing a feast for friends and family again. Sadly, this time without my grandmother because she had passed away. But in the middle of the preparations, I received a really important phone call, and I left the kitchen to take the call. The call was from one of the leaders of the state hospital. This little practice of holding people potentially in contempt of court, turns out it did not make the leaders of the hospital my biggest fans. So they had called, I took the call, and I was surprised to hear that they also understood how bad this problem was. They cared so much about the same people that we cared about. They had no idea how they were going to solve this problem either. The woman on that phone call said to me, if you care this much about this population, maybe you should start a court for people with competency issues. And I remember telling her on the phone, I just might. So I went back into the kitchen and I started to carve my radishes and place them in cold water, hoping that they would blossom by Thanksgiving the next day. And I was reflecting on my grandmother. I was thinking about her vulnerabilities, the similarities that she shared with this population just sitting in the jail, and that they had no idea when they were going to be moved. And I really felt helpless. I had no idea what to do. Then March of 2020 happened, and we received word that during COVID-19, no one was going to be moved from our jail to the state hospital. All of a sudden, this population of people I was so worried about, they were indefinitely going to be stuck in there because the state literally had no solution or ideas in place at the time. It became evident that this was a local problem and that we were going to have to do something about it. Now, Dr. Martin Luther King says that the solutions to a problem lie within the problem themselves. I knew the solution would have to come from our community. I knew that it would take a lot of people to help solve this problem, and I felt a responsibility to be a catalyst for change. So I hosted a party. Fun fact, radish sales declined during COVID because no Persians were hosting dinner parties any longer. That's not true. But this party was going to be online. We were going to have to invite people to attend virtually, and we hosted a community meeting. The results were life-changing. There were two people that always helped me with the court, with this population of people, and they helped me create the guest list. I invited anyone that we could think of. We invited lawyers. We invited the people who work in our jails. We invited law enforcement who was writing the tickets that brought people into the court system. We invited the mental health professionals. We invited the people who run the mission where people were sleeping at night when they were houseless. We invited people who did medication management, substance abuse treatment, anyone we could think of. I didn't know if they were going to attend, but they did, and they attended regularly. They would share their perspectives. We all cared about the same population, but we saw things so differently. We had different resources. We had different barriers, but we all came together with one united front of what we wanted to accomplish. I was afraid during that time that during one of these meetings, someone is going to say, Judge Blanco, how much money do you have so we can start working on this problem? Or what resources does Judicial have so we can start solving this issue? I was afraid they weren't going to attend anymore because the truth is I didn't have any money or any resources available to be able to do anything about this. But my fears were unfounded because the exact opposite happened. This group of people who cared about this population, they just wanted to work together to come up with solutions. Nobody was pointing the finger at anyone. Everybody wanted to collaborate like a team. And so there was this amazing energy that was created amongst all these professionals, and it was time to move that energy into a courtroom. So in May of 2021, the first competency court in the state of Colorado opened here in Larimer County. We had a totally different way of serving people now. Those stakeholders were actually in the courtroom waiting to walk up to an individual and actually work with them one-on-one. Instead of just asking, is somebody competent or not, so we could send them to the hospital if they didn't understand court, we started to ask, well, why is somebody not able to understand court? Because if there was no cure at that hospital, there was no point to put them in line and hold them in a jail to send them there. We started to ask, what do people need in order to be supported in our community? So if they're safe, they could have a healthy life and adequate support within our community rather than sitting in the jail. And all those stakeholders would work together, and our stakeholder group continued to increase. In fact, our county wrote grants. They were able to get a car to drive people to appointments. Our mental health professionals assigned a doctor that would prescribe medication and stay with that individual so that adjustments would be made by the same doctor. We had access to a neuropsych evaluation, a process that would take forever to get accomplished previously, but the doctor was willing to do it on the fly for us, and that would give people more access to more resources because now we knew that they qualified for other benefits in our community. I mean, I could go on and on. It was amazing what kind of collaboration was happening. And we're talking about problems like drug addiction, homelessness, things that are massive in our community, and this group was working on solutions left and right. By the fall of 2022, this court won a Human Relations Award for the amount of people that it was helping that were stuck inside of the jail. This court was the first. Now there are 11 courts like this all around the state of Colorado, and the 12th is in the process of being launched. We learned that in small communities or in large communities, Colorado is a model that any community can work on this issue when people come together. Just to give you a snapshot, in December of 2023, there were 366 people sitting in jails around the state of Colorado waiting to go to that hospital. But in our community, there were 19. And not all of those 19 were going to go to the hospital. Some of those people we were still working on plans for. So this court had a major impact. You may be wondering then, what can you do? When you have problems like this that feel so large to solve in your community, I would tell you to turn to the 3 C's. You need to care, communicate, and collaborate. First, identify the people who care. They care about this issue so much. Either host the meeting, or if you're invited, attend the meeting. I would give you one tip. When you're looking for the people that you feel care about this issue, do not overlook those with lived experience who've actually had to go through this process. Their perspective is so valuable and will teach you so much. The second C is communication. That doesn't mean just come to the meeting and tell everyone what's going on from your perspective. That means you come to the meeting genuinely interested in learning the other perspectives of the other people at that meeting. That means when they're speaking, you ask them questions because you really want to understand the answers. That means when they are speaking, you're not thinking about the next thing that you want to say, but genuinely invested in what's going on from their perspective. One tip I learned in communication is never overlook the importance of expressing gratitude to the people who are sitting around your table, telling them how appreciative you are that they're there working on this difficult issue with you. The third C is collaboration. Everyone's talking, and now we need to actually, as a team, work on solving the problem. Collaboration is a magical thing that happens when you have the right people in the room. They care, they're communicating, and now they're going to start resolving some of the issues. This work is really hard, so I would give you another tip regarding collaboration. Take a moment and always recognize even the small wins that we accomplish as a team, because we're making an impact and a difference, even if we're not solving the whole problem that's before us. So was Dr. Martin Luther King right? Is the solution lying within the problem itself? For us, the answer was absolutely yes. We were able to help vulnerable people navigate an extremely complicated criminal justice system. This story and this journey that I've shared with you, this is not unique to Colorado. This is happening in every single one of the other 49 states as well. But you can't sit idle and you can't feel helpless. The truth is that we need people to stop blaming the state system and actually start working towards a solution. And that comes more naturally when you care, communicate, and collaborate. You'll overcome obstacles you never dreamed you could. Thank you.